Andi Mack. It was one of Disney Channel's biggest hit shows that broke new ground for family television with its bold subject matter that tackled teenage pregnancy, young people coming out as not straight, mental health issues, and much more, all while still being a wholesome, serialized show. Now, while the show was not perfect at times, such as long story arcs that went nowhere, such as Buffy moving away, when the show was good, though, it was really good. One of the best family programs of all time. And again, it tackled subject matter and broke new ground no family show, at least by Disney, ever did before. So today, we're going to look back at the top 10 episodes that really display how good this show was. Not story arcs that drag throughout the seasons, but just single episodes that really showcase how good this show really was. To make it into this list, we'll be looking at which episodes had the best acting, best direction, best writing, and more importantly, really successfully addressed an important topic audiences can relate to. And so, here we go. Number 10. Perfect Day 2.0. In this mid-season 2 tale, since it seems Buffy is going to be moving away soon, Andi, Buffy, and Cyrus decide to try to recreate a seemingly perfect day from their childhood. However, everything kinda falls apart. But the three eventually realize that a good day doesn't have to be a recreation of a good memory, because it's often very difficult to physically relive what you remember. Rather, it's important to make the most of your present versus trying to recreate something from the past that you probably can't have happen again. And considering the nostalgia-crazed society we now live in, and how older people always talk about how the good old days were the best, this is the kind of story that helps remind people that sometimes the past is better kept in the past, and instead focus on making the best today. Number 9. A Good Hair Day. In another mid-season 2 episode, Andi finds out that it's Bowie's birthday. However, Bowie tries to convince Andi not to throw a surprise birthday party for him. Naturally, Andi plans one anyway, and naturally, Bowie's able to determine Andi is throwing it ahead of time. But through a conversation Bowie has with Bex, we learn Bowie does not want to celebrate his birthday since his dad shared the same birthday as him, but died years ago. However, Bex helps Bowie realize that just because you have painful memories connected to a certain day of the year, it does not mean you can't make new, positive memories around it, which Bowie does when he attends the surprise party, which ends with Andi finally calling Bowie her dad. It's a very special moment that, for Bowie at least, helps him move past the pain of losing his father years ago, as he finally starts to create strong positive ones of being a father himself now. It's a simple but very wonderful story. Number 8. The Quacks. In this early third season story, we get 3 tales that all deal with having to better bond with friends and loved ones. For Cyrus, we get a simpler and sillier tale where he has to learn how to dance for a class he's in, so in order to pass, Cyrus has to somewhat reluctantly open up to Amber and give the former bully a chance to impact him in a positive way. Meanwhile, with Bowie, Bex, and Andi, we learn Bowie assumes Bex and Andi will change their last names once Bowie marries Bex. However, the two ladies are very reluctant to do this, but since he still yearns for the desire for a family to feel united, Bowie decides he'll change his last name when they get married. It's a really sweet and adorable moment. And meanwhile, we see Jonas having a hard time communicating with his new deaf girlfriend Libby. The two are having communication issues for obvious reasons, but more so because Libby is tired of just texting all the time with Jonah. So then, in a sweet moment, we finally see Jonah try to meet Libby halfway by learning some sign language. It's a simple but very relevant tale. Number 7. Hey, Who Wants Pizza? In the season 2 premiere of the show, we get an hour-long tale that focuses on characters trying to figure out their next appropriate steps to growing up. First, we get Andi and Jonah finally becoming a couple of sorts, but everything isn't as super simple as one might assume it could have been. Next, we get Bowie trying to propose to Bex, but Bex unfortunately does not seem receptive to the idea of marrying Bowie. Not because she despises him, but Bex is still working on figuring out her identity and what she wants to do with her life. And then, more notably, we finally see Cyrus at an important stage of his growing up in which he begins to own up to his own developing new identity, when he admits to Buffy that he has feelings for Jonah. It's a very simple but very well done moment that further helps this series truly feel like it did take place in the real world, and it's definitely a noteworthy moment in this series' history and the history of family entertainment.
Buffy, I feel weird. Different.
You've always been weird, but you're no different.
Number 6. Once in a Mignon. In this very standout story from Season 3, the episode revolves around the characters actually meeting up at the Shiva for Cyrus's grandmother, the traditional Jewish mourning period for the loss of a loved one. It's actually a very, very solid story where the characters discuss and open up about being true to yourself and not waiting to tell the people the things that you've wanted to tell them for some time, since you never know how much time you'll actually have left with them, resulting in Cyrus finally coming out to the last person in his friendship circle he hadn't to yet, Jonah.
That's your classic bagel and lox. That's gefilte fish. Skip that. And I'm gay. Yeah? Okay, cool. Cool.
It's actually a very poignant moment. It's simple, but an extremely effective scene between Cyrus and Jonah. To put it simple, it's a great, straightforward tale. Number 5. 13 and Outside the Box. Yep, it's the 2-part series premiere that got everyone talking about this show when they first saw it.
I'm not your sister. I'm your mother.
Now, on one hand, yeah, this episode deserved all the hype it got. It broke new ground for Disney by featuring a character who got pregnant as a teenager and the relationship with that child from that aforementioned pregnancy. But the thing is, it was more than just that. It showed young viewers that the world is not perfect. Parents aren't as black and white as they seem, and improving problems in your family is not going to happen in under an hour like it does on most TV shows. And that's what probably subconsciously impressed a lot of people when they first saw this. Beck's situation with Andi and the rest of her family does not improve at the end of the series premiere. Okay, it gets a little better. Bex goes from hiding the fact she's Andi's mother to admitting that title, but the show expertly sets the stage for a grander story. A story that anyone could see was going to take many hours of television to resolve. This was not a simple cut and dry situation. It was a delicate one, and it was hard at the time for anyone to accurately predict the specifics of how it would all get better. It was complex writing related to a mature situation, and yet was still family-friendly entertainment. And unlike other shows when they first begin, Andi Mack's writers, directors, and actors were at the top of their game from day one. Series premieres really do not get better than this. Number 4, A Moving Day. Now in this penultimate episode, things start off pretty simple enough. Actually, it starts off more like a sitcom plot. Beck says she's won tickets to get a free meal from some famous chef who lives in the mountains, so she gets Bowie, Andi, and her mom Celia to drive up to the snowy mountains, and all sorts of silly hijinks occur. Celia becomes almost unbearable with how she begins the journey and how she drives the car. There's some whining along the way, and there's a long uphill climb to their destination. The uphill journey is obviously very long and difficult for everyone. But then, when they make it to the top, it's not a famous chef that's up there to meet them. It's an outdoor wedding ceremony that Bex has prepared for her and Bowie. The journey that started off with one kind of shocking surprise appropriately ends with an even greater type of surprise. And it's actually very appropriate that Bex brought Andi and Celia on her and Bowie's mountain hike with them. The walk that the family took up the mountain was symbolic. It was an uphill struggle, just like Bex and Bowie's journey throughout the show was an uphill struggle. But they couldn't have made it without their family, hence why the family took the uphill walk with them. Rebecca Bex Mack did indeed experience an incredible saga of growth and maturity throughout the series, but she never went through it alone. She experienced and got help in her long journey from her daughter, her mother, and even sometimes her daughter's friends, who are also there at the wedding. And so finally, after such a long journey in more ways than one, Bex and Bowie have finally both reached the appropriate point where they're finally ready to get married, surrounded by their closest loved ones, in an adorable and emotionally powerful scene that, when seen by fans when it first aired, did not leave a dry eye in the house. Complete with Jonah singing Bowie's song he wrote for Bex on the guitar, and humorously enough, Andi's phone goes off in the middle of the wedding, but it honestly acts as the perfect metaphor for how no family is perfect, but they can still move forward and love each other. The scene is honestly the emotional pinnacle of the series, and is simply an amazing tribute to the power of the human spirit, and how patience, kindness, perseverance, and love can change people and families for the better. Now yeah, the series finale did a nice job at putting all of the characters in a place that made the fans happy, but this episode just portrayed a much more powerful journey in more ways than one, and gave much more emotional finality to everything. And now with all that being said, let's go back to a much more earlier point in the series as we look at number 3. Dad influence. In this season 1 episode, we finally get the tale of Andi meeting her father, Bowie, for the first time.
Bowie, this is your daughter.
Whoa.
After Bex at the end of the previous episode just point blank told Bowie that Andi is his daughter, we get an entire story here that really is mostly about the new father and daughter duo spending a day together. Now for Andi, meeting her father is a big deal, but for Bowie, learning he has a daughter for the first time in his life is an even bigger bombshell. But surprisingly, Bowie takes all of this very well. Seriously, when Andi asks Bowie if he wanted to be a father, Bowie simply responds by saying that he believes the universe wanted him to be a father and accepts it. All of this is a surprising but very welcome turn of events. So many other drama shows, whether they be for kids, teenagers, or adults, take the story concept of a long-lost parent and just add lots of serious drama to it, such as having the long-lost parent be a jerk, be super neglectful, or just be a flat-out antagonist to the main character. Mack, on the other hand, takes the entire concept in a different direction. Bowie is presented as a flawed character that's uncertain of what the next step he's supposed to do should be, but just like how Bex learned to embrace motherhood in the first episode, Bowie learns to embrace fatherhood in this story. He doesn't just find out he has a kid and then runs away scared, he realizes he has a child now, understands he has to be a responsible role model to that child, and immediately sets out to do that. That is a very welcome plot development to see here. Plus, in the episode, Andi and Bowie really don't have any conflict with each other. It's a little awkward, yes, for them, but they try to do everything right every step of the way. And honestly, it's actually very refreshing to see a series tackle the concept of a developing parent and child relationship in such a positive manner. In American society today, parental neglect has become the biggest indirect cause of all sorts of problems with kids and teenagers. And a lot of that stems from parents who have children, know they have children, but ignore their children's needs for their own selfish ends. But Bowie, on the other hand, acts completely unselfish in this episode, and every action we see him take is for Andi's benefit. Now, that being said, Bowie at this point in the series is still unprepared to be a completely responsible parent. However, deciding whether or not you're ready to be a parent is not the main point of this episode. The main point of this episode is, once you are a parent, you are one. So embrace it and do your best with it. And to see that kind of life lesson presented in any show, let alone what could be deemed as a children's show, is pretty amazing. It may not be a groundbreaking episode to many people, but it was a story with good characters making good choices despite the difficult situation they were in. That is something we definitely need much more of on TV. Number 2, Mama.
I made you leave. It was me.
In this episode of Andi Mack, we get a story that, while finally providing some great backstory on the Mack family, also provides a tale of how holding on to one point of view without thinking about how others may see you can lead to negative consequences. The main part of the episode focuses on Andi and Bex helping Celia clean the house. However, digging through mementos of the past causes memories of the past to fully resurface, most notably memories of what led Bex to leaving Andi with Celia many years ago. The thing is, though, both Bex and Celia seem to remember these events differently. Bex recalls Celia being extremely critical of every mistake Bex was making, while Celia remembers Bex being very irresponsible. The thing is, though, despite these flashbacks seemingly being in conflict with each other, they actually do fit together. You see, there's been more than enough evidence in the series thus far to say that Bex does have a history with being irresponsible and not making the best choices. Thus, all of Bex's many irresponsible choices, most notably becoming pregnant with Andi before she was ready, would cause Celia to become very critical of her. This is especially true when you come to realize that, for Celia, witnessing Bex making so many mistakes would undoubtedly cause her to question where she went wrong as a mother, and all that frustration would cause her to become more harsh in her interactions with Bex. So, while the flashbacks Bex and Celia do have in this episode might be skewed a bit, it's equally valid that both flashbacks did happen exactly as they both remember, but at different times. However, this does lead to a flashback moment that both Bex and Celia both seem to agree did indeed happen when Andi was just a few months old, when both Bex and Celia have an argument that goes on for over half an hour, but causes them to both forget where they had left Andi. And this causes both individuals, but perhaps more so Bex, to realize that the two fighting constantly will only lead to Andi eventually getting hurt. And that's when Bex left. It was one major event, but it was viewed in two different ways. To Celia, this was Bex just being irresponsible again. But for Bex, this was a sacrifice. For Bex, she wanted to spare Andi the experience of two things. One, being raised by a mother who wasn't completely ready to be one, and the other being the experience of being raised by a mother who would be constantly told by her own mother that she was not up to the task. And seeing Andi actually say her first word, Mama, to Celia, and not her, just causes Bex, who already feels like she's completely irresponsible, to feel driven away to leave Andi with the woman who seems more capable of being that to her. And this is something that could realistically happen in our current culture today. Too often many people, even those with the best intentions, can become so obsessed with just their point of view that they fail to try to take others' points of view around them. And this isn't an issue of what is right and what is wrong. It's the issue of just taking a moment to think about how another person may be viewing you or the same situation you're witnessing, and how that can greatly impact how you then interact with that person. In the story, we now realize that Celia simply had the intention to help give Bex and Andi a better life. But Celia's inability to see how Bex perceived her caused her to unintentionally come across as rude and critical to Bex. And while Bex was indeed irresponsible during her teenage years, she still had every intention to try to be a good mother to Andi. But Bex's inability to try to see how Celia perceived her caused her to feel disconnected from her own mother and felt driven to leave. And this leads to the importance of communication, and not just shouting out your inner thoughts with people around you, but real communication. When you talk, but also listen, and then reflect on what others have said and how they interacted with you. Another great example of this is in the side plot of the episode, with Buffy playing cards with her elderly neighbor. Buffy's neighbor, like her, is obsessed with winning. But when Buffy realizes that her neighbor's obsession with winning caused her friends and family to not want to be around her anymore, it causes Buffy to finally reflect on what others have said about her in the past and how they interacted, which leads Buffy, for the first time in her life, walking away from a game, not caring if she won or not. Despite this episode of Andi Mack feeling quite short and not giving viewers as much flashback material as they might have wanted on the Mack family, it does still present great character drama and a great life lesson. For so long, Bex and Celia kept shouting their thoughts at the other without really listening to each other. But now, they are finally willing to hear the other out, which hopefully will help the two finally be able to help each other more and grow in the future. And if you yourself are experiencing some sort of crisis or helping someone else with their crisis, don't forget that communication is key.
I trusted you because I knew how much you loved her.
That was an amazing sacrifice you made. I don't think I could have made it.
You've never said that before.
And now for number 1, Home Away from Home. Now, it might not come across as the best episode to some, the basic premise and setup may even seem a little too simple, but hear me out. In this episode, Bex now has her own apartment for the first time in her life, and Andi is living with her. But Bex is having a hard time doing all the basic things that both the role of a homeowner and single mother demand of her. Now, the situation may seem like just an excuse for very sitcom-like moments to occur, and at first it does. Andi's pants are washed with lip balm by accident, Bex walks around like a zombie while trying to get coffee ready, and the power keeps going out at bad times for them. But this is all countered when it's followed by an actually well-paced dramatic story instead. As one with common sense would know, being both a homeowner and a single mother for the first time is very difficult. Trying to manage a large number of appliances while trying to still care for the physical and emotional needs for your child is very time-consuming, and there is no quick fix to all these difficulties you'll face. And you can tell this entire situation is very frustrating to Bex. She does want to be a good mother, she does want to provide for her child, and she does want to be independent and responsible. However, because of her limited funds, she's wound up with only being able to afford an apartment with lots of broken appliances and electrical issues. She does want to give her daughter more things and more space to call her own, because she is an adolescent that deserves that space. But the thing is, Bex can't do that because of the size of her living conditions. Now, it is sad to see Bex so frustrated with the situation in the story, and yet this is the situation you'd expect considering her backstory and the decisions she's made in the past. So this results in both Bex and Andi considering if Andi, or both of them, should move back in with Bex's parents. Now, Andi and Bex do start to come by a few times to the old house, but it's really just to get a few of Andi's old things, have Andi do her laundry there, and get Andi some more food. But despite still needing some help and wanting the family to stay connected, Bex still wants to be Andi's sole caretaker now. But then we get to a point where Bex is unable to even provide Andi a cooked meal one night. And that is when Bex gives up on the idea that she is fit to be Andi's mother. So Bex brings Andi back to Celia, asking Celia to take care of her daughter. Now, this is not because Bex wants to be neglectful to Andi, but rather it's because Bex wants to give Andi the best life possible, and the best life Andi can get right now is from her grandparents. But then, in a clever plot twist, Celia actually takes Andi back to Bex's apartment. Despite the mixed feelings anyone has about this situation, everyone does agree that Bex is Andi's mother, and despite how flawed Bex and her home environment are, the one place Andi should be now is with Bex. Flaws and all. Andi's grandparents will still be a part of their lives, which is clearly seen when Celia gets Bex a better brand of laundry detergent, but when it comes to where Andi's real home now is, this story affirms how that home will now be wherever Bex is. And this is only affirmed at the end of the episode when Andi looks at Bex and for the first time ever calls her her mom. Overall, this episode provides one of the most solid stories for the series. The story doesn't need an antagonist, large-scale conflict, identity crisis, or groundbreaking issue. The conflict of the story just comes from life happening. This is the situation the characters are in, and they just need to find a way to deal with it. But there's no perfect way to deal with it. Is it more important for a child to be with those that can provide more for them? Or should they rather stay with their flawed parent? At what point should a parent's flaws be so great that they give their child away to somebody else? And at what point should certain flaws just be tolerated so that the child and parent stay together? And how much space should a single parent trying to raise their kid be given? And how much assistance is appropriate to provide them? These are not easy questions to answer. However, this episode of Andi and Mack does a very solid job at putting all of the cards on the table and showing viewers of all ages, this is what you'll have to deal with if you ever land in this kind of situation yourself one day. It's an episode literally anyone can relate to in some shape or form, and it's a real highlight for the series and family entertainment as a whole. And so, that's our top 10 list. For those that are big Andi Mack fans, hopefully you had a fun time reliving the series highlights. And for those that are not Andi Mack fans, hopefully you'll now be more likely to check out this amazing series sometime soon.